Picture this: a lone rider galloping through the dead of night, the weight of empires resting on the scraps of parchment tucked inside his cloak. No fanfare, no glory, just the silent urgency of a message that could change the world. This was the life of a medieval courier, the invisible hand that shaped history from the shadows. While kings and knights dominated the grand stage, these unsung operatives moved like ghosts between cities, courts, and battlefields, carrying secrets that determined the rise and fall of dynasties. Their names are lost to time, but their legacy is etched into the very foundations of power. What if I told you that some of history's most pivotal moments, treaties that ended wars, betrayals that toppled thrones, even the spread of ideas that ignited revolutions, were all made possible by networks of couriers so clandestine, their methods remain a mystery to this day. These weren't just messengers, they were spies, diplomats, and sometimes even forgers, mastering the art of deception to slip past enemies undetected. From the windswept steppes of the Mongol Empire to the candlelit chambers of Venetian conspirators, their routes formed a hidden web stretching across continents. And here's the twist: much of what they did was designed to vanish without a trace. Burned letters, coded phrases, even ink that faded after reading every detail was crafted to leave no trail behind. So how did these shadowy figures operate, and why does their story matter now? Because this isn't just about the past. It's about how information controlled, manipulated, or leaked has always been the ultimate weapon. The medieval couriers were the original hackers of their age, exploiting the gaps between power and perception. Over the next few minutes, we'll pull back the curtain on their ingenious tactics, from hollowed-out staffs carrying secret dispatches to the way they used merchant caravans as cover for high-stakes diplomacy. You'll discover how a single courier could delay an invasion with a well-timed lie or spark a rebellion by altering just a few words in a royal decree. By the time we're done, you'll never look at history's grand narratives the same way again. The truth: empires weren't just built on swords and speeches, they were built on whispers. And it's time those whispers were heard. To understand how these covert messenger networks became so powerful, we have to go back to their origins, where necessity bred innovation. In the sprawling Roman Empire, the cursus publicus was born not out of luxury, but survival. Picture a world where news from the frontier could take months to reach the capital, where rebellions flared and died before Rome even knew they existed. The empire's solution: a state-run relay of riders and way stations, each one a link in a chain stretching thousands of miles. Fast horses, fresh riders swapping at checkpoints. It was the ancient world's version of high-speed data transmission. But here's where things got interesting. As empires crumbled and new powers rose, these systems didn't disappear. They adapted. Take the Mongols, whose Yam system turned courier networks into a weapon of conquest. Under Genghis Khan, messengers didn't just carry letters, they were the bloodstream of an empire that spanned continents. A rider could gallop from Hungary to Karakorum in weeks, thanks to a network of way stations stocked with food, spare horses, and armed guards. But speed wasn't their only advantage. The Mongols understood something revolutionary: control the flow of information, and you control the narrative. Their couriers didn't just deliver news, they filtered it. A delayed message here, a strategically altered report there. Suddenly, entire armies moved based on whispers rather than facts. And then there were the disguises. In the fractured kingdoms of medieval Europe, where every border meant danger, couriers mastered the art of blending in. A merchant's caravan might hide encrypted treaties sewn into linings. A pilgrim's staff could be hollowed out to carry maps of enemy fortifications. Even the church got in on the act, with abbots and bishops serving as middlemen for sensitive political deals. This wasn't just about delivering messages, it was about making sure no one even knew the message existed until it was too late. The real genius, many of these systems were designed to self-destruct. Letters written in lemon juice that vanished when heated, wax seals that shattered if tampered with, even messengers who'd swallow documents if captured. Every layer was a safeguard against exposure. What's astonishing is how these networks mirrored the empires they served. The Byzantine Empire's couriers moved like shadows, their identities protected by layers of bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Venetian messengers operated like a corporate spy ring, with encrypted ledgers and paid informants at every port. But perhaps no one perfected the craft like the Mamluks of Egypt, whose pigeon post system could outpace any rider. Birds carrying tiny scrolls that decided battles before the enemy knew they'd begun. These weren't just mailmen, they were the original cybersecurity experts, fighting an endless, invisible war over who controlled the truth. And as we'll see next, that war would shape the fate of nations. The life of a medieval courier demanded skills that would put most modern spies to shame. These weren't just men who could ride fast. They were human Swiss army knives, each ability carefully honed for survival and subterfuge. Fluency in multiple languages was often their first weapon. Imagine a courier slipping between the courts of France and Burgundy, shifting dialects as easily as changing cloaks, his accent perfectly mirroring whichever noble's lands he crossed. Some took this further, mastering regional mannerisms the way a Venetian merchant held his wine cup, or how a German knight adjusted his sword belt, tiny details that meant the difference between passing unnoticed and swinging from a gibbet. Memory was another lethal tool in their arsenal. The best couriers could recite entire treaties word for word after a single reading, delivering verbal messages that left no paper trail. Byzantine messengers perfected this art, using intricate memory palaces to store information, visualizing each clause of a treaty as rooms in an imaginary castle. If captured, they had nothing to physically surrender. Others employed steganography, hiding messages in plain sight. A seemingly innocent merchant's inventory list might contain troop movements when read every third word, while love poems could mask assassination orders through prearranged rhyming schemes. Physical endurance bordered on superhuman. Mongol couriers of the Yam system routinely covered 200 miles in a single day, switching horses at way stations without breaking stride. European messengers faced different challenges, navigating mountain passes where bandits lurked behind every outcrop, or bribing ferrymen to cross rivers under cover of darkness. Their survival often depended on reading landscapes like living maps, knowing which muddy path led to a safe monastery and which ended in an ambush. Some carried hollowed-out pilgrim staffs containing compasses or tiny maps drawn on vellum, while others memorized constellations as navigation aids when roads disappeared. But perhaps their most dangerous skill was deception. The smartest couriers never looked the part. A shabby friar begging alms might be carrying papal edicts in his bread loaf. That giggling court jester, his bells concealed gold coins for bribing border guards. There are accounts of couriers sewing jeweled signet rings into their scalps, letting wounds heal over them, only to cut them free when reaching their destination. Every aspect of their appearance was a calculated risk. Too well-dressed invited robbery, too disheveled aroused suspicion. The perfect courier moved through the world like a ghost, noticed only when they chose to be. Their routes were masterclasses in misdirection. While kings assumed important messages traveled the main roads, seasoned couriers knew better. A network of abandoned Roman aqueducts became smuggling tunnels beneath Italian cities. Overgrown Celtic paths winding through forests served as invisible highways between castles. Some even used the underground rivers of Paris as secret passageways, navigating by touch in pitch darkness to emerge beneath their recipient's cellar. The Byzantine Empire took this further, maintaining duplicate way stations, public ones for decoy messages, and hidden ones where the real dispatches changed hands. What made these systems truly formidable was their adaptability. When the Ottoman Empire cracked down on pigeon posts, couriers switched to floating messages downstream in waterproof goods. After the church banned encrypted letters during the Inquisition, messengers developed tap codes using monastery bells. Each obstacle spawned new innovations, creating an endless game of cat and mouse between couriers and those trying to intercept them. The greatest testament to their skill, many messages that shaped history, like the secret pact that forged the Franco-Ottoman alliance, were carried right under enemy noses, their bearers vanishing into the crowd before anyone thought to question them. The real magic of these hidden routes wasn't just in their geography, it was in their invisibility. While merchants trudged along the well-worn Silk Road with camels laden with spices, couriers moved like shadows along parallel trails known only to initiates. A narrow goat path winding through the Caucasus Mountains might shave days off a journey. A forgotten Roman viaduct, its stones overgrown with ivy, could become a midnight highway for dispatches that couldn't risk daylight. These weren't just shortcuts, they were living, evolving organisms constantly shifting as wars erupted. Bandits claimed territories, or new alliances opened fresh corridors of trust. Monasteries became the beating hearts of this clandestine network. Behind thick stone walls, monks copied manuscripts by day and passed coded letters by night. The Abbey of Cluny in France operated as a veritable switchboard for papal communications, its scribes altering seals and rewriting addresses to throw off pursuers. In the Alps, remote chapels offered more than sanctuary. Their wine cellars hid tunnel entrances leading to alternate valleys. A courier might arrive as a penitent seeking confession, only to leave with a sealed psalm book containing battle plans for the 100 Years' War. The church's neutrality made it the perfect cover. Who would dare search a bishop's carriage for anything but blessings? But secular powers had their own tricks. The Hanseatic League's bustling ports masked a darker purpose. Sailors' sea shanties carried encrypted market prices that doubled as troop movement alerts. A barrel of salted herring might contain a false bottom holding treaties between Scandinavian kings. Over in the Islamic world, the Barid system turned desert caravanserais into intelligence hubs. Their innovation, pigeon posts relayed from rooftop to rooftop, outpacing any horse. A single bird could fly from Baghdad to Damascus in hours, its leg bearing a tiny silk scroll with news that would pivot an entire campaign. Verification was everything. In a world where forgery could topple kingdoms, couriers developed elaborate authentication rituals. Venetian agents used terrible parchment. Only a specific way of folding would reveal the true message. Mongol riders carried paisers, inscribed tablets that functioned like biometric passports. Breaking the wax seal incorrectly meant instant execution. Some networks employed familial dialects, phrases only someone raised in a particular mountain village would pronounce correctly. A single misstep in tone or timing could expose an imposter. The legacy of these routes still echoes today, modern diplomacy's back-channel negotiations. A direct descendant of the Abbey's whispering galleries, emergency courier lanes in war zones, they mirror the Hanseatic League's emergency maritime routes. Even the dark web's encrypted pathways owe a conceptual debt to those medieval monks hiding messages in plain sight. The next time you see a nondescript delivery van or a bike messenger weaving through traffic, remember, their ancestors didn't just carry mail. They carried the fate of empires, one secret turn in the road at a time. The fall of Constantinople wasn't decided by swords alone, it was lost in the space between messages. While Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI waited desperately for reinforcements from Europe, his couriers were running into walls. Some were caught by Ottoman patrols, their letters stuffed with pleas for help tossed into campfires. Others drowned trying to slip past the naval blockade, their waterlogged dispatches sinking unheard into the Bosporus. Meanwhile, Sultan Mehmed II's network operated with terrifying precision. His messengers moved like clockwork through hidden trails in the Rhodope Mountains, relaying real-time intelligence about the city's weakening defenses. A single intercepted Byzantine pigeon revealed critical food shortages information Mehmed exploited by tightening his siege just as starvation set in. The Ottomans didn't just outfight the Byzantines, they outcommunicated them. While European kings debated whether to send aid, Mehmed's couriers were already delivering false troop movement reports to Venetian spies, creating chaos among potential allies. His fastest riders could cover the 200 miles from Edirne to the front lines in under 3 days, thanks to a relay system with fresh horses every 20 miles. Byzantine messengers, by contrast, had to navigate hostile territories where every border guard demanded bribes. The cruelest twist, some of the empire's last dispatches reached Rome weeks after the city had fallen, their wax seals still unbroken over pleas that no longer mattered. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was an information apocalypse. The Byzantines' famed Golden Gate messenger service, once the envy of Christendom, had deteriorated into a patchwork of unreliable routes. Meanwhile, Mehmed's network incorporated cutting-edge technology. Semaphore towers flashed signals across the Marmara Sea, while coded drumbeats coordinated attacks under cover of night. When the Sultan needed to keep his cannon placements secret, he used deaf couriers who couldn't be tortured into revealing locations. Every innovation gave him an edge, while Byzantine messengers still relied on centuries-old methods that had become tragically obsolete. The aftermath proved just how vital these networks were. Within hours of Constantinople's fall, Mehmed's riders were galloping toward every major capital, controlling the narrative before rumors could spread. Their carefully crafted reports presented the conquest as inevitable, discouraging Christian counterattacks. Meanwhile, fleeing Byzantine scholars who might have preserved knowledge were hunted by Ottoman couriers turned bounty hunters, not for their lives, but for the priceless manuscripts they carried. Even in collapse, information remained the ultimate prize. What makes this moment so pivotal is how clearly it demonstrates a universal truth. Empires don't fall when their walls are breached, but when their lines of communication fail. The Ottomans didn't just conquer a city, they hacked an entire information ecosystem, replacing it with their own. And as we'll see next, no one weaponized this concept more ruthlessly than the Mongols, whose courier systems turned grassland trails into the internet of the medieval world. The Mongol Yam system didn't just move messages, it moved mountains. Picture this, a lone rider thundering across the steppe at sunset, his horse lathered in sweat, a golden paisa gleaming at his belt. At the next station, fresh mounts stood ready, their hooves pawing the ground in anticipation. Within minutes, he'd transferred his verbal dispatch to the next rider, who vanished into the gathering dark. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was a finely tuned machine that turned grassland into an information superhighway. What made the Yam revolutionary wasn't just its speed, but its ruthless simplicity. Every 30 miles, a way station stocked with provisions, spare horses, and armed guards. No debates, no delays, just an uninterrupted flow of imperial will across thousands of miles. The golden paisa tablets were more than VIP passes, they were licenses to commandeer anything. A courier flashing this insignia could demand the fastest horse from a noble's stable, requisition food from peasant stores, even clear entire roads of traffic. But with this power came brutal accountability. Every rider knew the law. Failed to deliver a message, and your family would pay the price. Some accounts describe entire lineages being erased for a single delayed dispatch. This merciless efficiency created something unprecedented, an empire where the Khan's word in Karakoram could alter events in Hungary within weeks, while European kings still waited months for news from neighboring realms. Oral messages were the Yam's secret weapon. Unlike parchment that could be intercepted or forged, spoken words died with the listener. Couriers memorized dispatches using rhythmic patterns that made recall foolproof, often embedding false details to trap potential spies. If captured, they'd reveal only the decoy information before biting into hidden poison capsules. The most sensitive communications used a linguistic cipher, phrases that sounded like ordinary Mongol, but held layered meanings known only to commanders. A seemingly innocent report about grey wolves near the western pastures might signal an impending attack on Polish borders. European powers tried desperately to copy this system, but always stumbled on their own bureaucracy. When the Holy Roman Emperor established his own relay posts, local lords taxed the messengers or conscripted their horses. French royal couriers faced endless delays at river crossings where ferrymen demanded exorbitant fees. The difference was cultural. The Mongols saw information as the lifeblood of power, while European nobles treated messaging as a privilege to be monetized. Even the famed Venetian postal service, swift by medieval standards, couldn't match the Yam's seamless integration of speed, secrecy, and intimidation. Perhaps the most telling proof of the Yam's superiority lies in its afterlife. Long after the Mongol Empire fractured, remnants of its network persisted. Russian Tsars adapted Yam stations into their own Yamshchik system, complete with the same ruthless punctuality. Ottoman Sipahi riders adopted the Pesa concept, wearing inscribed armbands that functioned as mobile command centers. Today's emergency dispatch systems, from diplomatic pouches to priority military channels, still echo the Yam's core principle. When information is power, speed and secrecy aren't luxuries. They're the difference between empire and oblivion. This relentless efficiency reshaped warfare itself. Mongol generals could adjust battle plans in real time based on fresh intelligence, while crusaders at Acre were still debating strategies from letters written months prior. When Subutai orchestrated his famous simultaneous invasions of Poland and Hungary in 1241, the Yam allowed his divided forces to coordinate across 800 miles as if they were in the same tent. European chroniclers attributed these feats to sorcery, unable to comprehend that the real magic lay in disciplined men riding hard under a sky full of silent, deadly information. The system's collapse came not from external pressure but from its own success. As the empire grew too vast, even the Yam's breakneck pace couldn't outrun fragmentation. Stations became targets for rebel warlords, while rival Khans corrupted messengers to spread disinformation. In the end, the network that had built history's largest contiguous empire became a victim of the very distances it once conquered. Yet its ghost still lingers in the way modern special forces operate behind enemy lines, in how crisis negotiators value precise verbal delivery over written words, even in the encrypted packets zipping through fiber optic cables. The Yam proved a timeless truth: control the message and you control the world. Now consider this: while Europe's castles boasted towering walls to stop armies, the Mongols built something far more enduring. Their greatest fortress wasn't made of stone, but of countless hooves pounding the earth in perfect rhythm. carrying whispers that toppled kingdoms without drawing a single sword. While the Mongols raced messages across continents with terrifying efficiency, Europe's courier networks resembled a fractured mirror, each shard reflecting the chaos of competing powers. Kings, merchant guilds, and even local bishops operated their own messaging systems, with no standardized routes or shared protocols. The papal couriers' messengers, recognizable by their scarlet-trimmed cloaks and wax seals bearing the crossed keys of St. Peter, came closest to a professional service. Riding along well-maintained post roads between monasteries, they could deliver a letter from Avignon to Rome in under 2 weeks, astonishing speed for the era. Yet even they faced constant threats. Bandits who knew papal dispatches often carried indulgences worth more than gold, or rival city-states that saw church communications as fair game in their petty wars. The 100 Years' War laid bare these systemic flaws in bloodstained detail. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, French knights charged straight into an English ambush because their scouts' warning never arrived. The messenger had been waylaid by mercenaries selling information to both sides. Decades later, the Duke of Burgundy's secret pact with England reached Paris too late to prevent the massacre at Agincourt, having been delayed by autumn floods that washed out bridges. Such breakdowns weren't accidents. They were symptoms of a continent where every river crossing required negotiation with local lords, where safe conduct papers meant nothing beyond the next hilltop fortress. Enterprising monarchs tried to fix the cracks. Louis XI of France, nicknamed the Universal Spider for his web of intrigues, created the first royal postal service with relay stations every 20 miles. His innovation, couriers wore tunics embroidered with fleurs de lis, making attacks on them tantamount to treason. But the system rotted from within. Station masters skimmed funds meant for fresh horses, while riders sold copies of sensitive letters to the highest bidder. A surviving account book from 1483 shows one courier being paid extra to forget he'd seen a letter about tax increases. The merchant class fared better. Hanseatic League traders developed a proto-insurance system where multiple copies of important contracts traveled by different routes, ensuring at least one would arrive. Venetian bankers used a cipher so complex that when a codebook washed ashore after a shipwreck, locals reportedly burned it as witchcraft. Yet these private networks served profit, not kingdoms, a fact that became disastrously clear during the Wars of the Roses, when London's mercers prioritized wool shipments over battlefield dispatches. What emerged from this mess was something unexpected. Competition bred innovation. The very lack of centralization forced European couriers to develop skills their Mongol counterparts never needed. A Burgundian messenger might carry 3 versions of the same letter, one obvious, 2 hidden to confuse interceptors. English royal envoys perfected the art of sleeping dispatches, writing between the lines with alum solution that darkened when breathed upon. Most ingenious were the Fugger banking family's weatherproof dispatch cases, lined with wax and cork that floated if thrown overboard during pirate attacks. These scattered advances would eventually coalesce into the world's first modern postal services, but not before one final twist: the rise of couriers who specialized not in delivering messages but in stealing them. Because where information flows, spies always follow. Trust was the rarest currency in the courier trade and the most easily counterfeited. Behind the noble rhetoric of loyalty and service, a darker game unfolded: the art of the double cross. Take the case of Sir John Fastolf, the English knight whose stolen dispatches during the Wars of the Roses rewrote battle plans overnight. His courier, a man who'd carried messages for years without suspicion, vanished en route to London, only to reappear weeks later in the court of the Yorkist opposition. The price of his betrayal: a chest of Flemish gold and lands confiscated from Fastolf's own estates. What made this betrayal so devastating wasn't just the lost intelligence, but the realization that no messenger could ever be fully trusted. The Battle of Bosworth exposed this vulnerability in brutal fashion. Richard III's final plea for reinforcements never reached his northern allies because the courier tasked with its delivery, a man who'd served the Plantagenets for a decade, deliberately took a wrong turn into Tudor-controlled territory. By the time Richard realized the betrayal, Henry Tudor's forces had already intercepted and rewritten the message, luring Yorkist troops into a fatal diversion. This wasn't just espionage, it was psychological warfare. The courier's defection shattered Richard's trust in his entire network at the worst possible moment, leaving him isolated on that fatal hill. Kings responded with increasingly paranoid safeguards. Edward IV of England employed triple-blind systems where 3 couriers carried different fragments of the same message, none knowing the full content. The French crown went further, maintaining a shadow network of black couriers, often former criminals with brands burned into their palms as permanent reminders of the consequences of betrayal. Their identities were known only to the king's spymaster, and their dispatches were written in a cipher that changed weekly. Even these measures sometimes failed. In 1487, a Habsburg courier famously sewed a decoded letter into his horse's saddle, only for the animal to be slaughtered for food by starving mercenaries who promptly sold the blood-stained parchment to the French. The most ingenious counterintelligence tactic emerged from the Italian city-states, the poisoned message. Venice's Council of 10 would deliberately leak false troop movements through seemingly compromised couriers, then track how the misinformation spread. A single altered date in a dispatch could reveal which foreign court had turned a messenger by seeing which army mobilized prematurely. Florentine bankers took a different approach, embedding numeric codes within loan documents that doubled as spy reports, a system so effective that when the Medici family fell, their enemies prioritized seizing not their gold but their courier ledgers. Yet for all these precautions, the greatest vulnerability remained human nature. A surviving payroll from the Burgundian court shows payments to a courier listed simply as Jean of the Broken Nose, not for delivery services, but for having resisted the hot irons for 6 hours before speaking. Even the most loyal messengers had breaking points, and every ruler knew it. That relentless uncertainty, the gnawing doubt that every parchment, every whispered word, might be part of an elaborate deception, is what ultimately birthed the golden age of cryptographic warfare. Because if you couldn't trust the courier, you had to make damn sure no one else could read his message either. The real genius of medieval cryptography wasn't just in hiding messages, it was in making the very act of communication disappear. Take the Venetian cipher boxes, unassuming wooden cases for merchant accounts that concealed sliding panels. Only when twisted in a specific sequence would the interior compartment reveal its true cargo: silk maps of Ottoman fortifications or encrypted ledgers detailing bribes to port officials. Their most infamous system, the Book of Numbers, assigned every significant figure in Europe a code. The Pope became 327, while the King of France was simply 9. But here's the twist: these numbers changed monthly, and only a handful of senior couriers carried the key. Lose your cipher book, and suddenly an entire network's correspondence turned to gibberish overnight. Some codes played mind games with interceptors. The Sforza family of Milan employed null ciphers, messages stuffed with obvious code words to distract from the real intelligence hidden in plain text. A letter complaining about the bishop's gout might actually be reporting troop movements through the placement of commas. French diplomats took this further with dancing letters, where every third vowel in a seemingly innocent love poem spelled out assassination orders when read vertically. The brilliance, even under torture, a courier could truthfully recite the surface message without revealing its lethal undercurrents. Then there were the physical concealments that bordered on artistry. Byzantine agents perfected shadow writing, using diluted inks that only darkened when heated over a candle. German mercenaries sewed dispatches into the wax seals of entirely unrelated documents. Breaking the seal destroyed the evidence. But perhaps the most audacious was the bread cipher used by Hungarian rebels, messages pressed into dough before baking, legible only when the loaf was sliced at a precise angle. These weren't just hiding places, they were psychological traps, turning every intercepted letter into a potential wild goose chase. The Church's Inquisition inadvertently advanced the craft to new heights. When they banned encrypted letters in 1428, Spanish Jews developed the knotted thread cipher, different colored strings tied around a merchant's purse conveying everything from safe house locations to warning signals. Moorish couriers in Granada responded by inventing water writing, scratching messages onto parchment with alum solution that only appeared when dipped in mineral springs. Each crackdown bred more ingenious workarounds, a testament to human creativity under pressure. What made these systems truly revolutionary was their layered deception. The best encrypted messages operated like Russian nesting dolls, a decoy cipher obvious enough to satisfy captors, a second more subtle code for moderately suspicious recipients, and the true message visible only through an absurdly specific method known to one person. A surviving Templar scroll from Acre demonstrates this perfectly. The surface text discusses vineyard harvests, heat application reveals a list of ship movements, but only holding the parchment at a 45-degree angle to candlelight exposes coordinates for hidden treasure. Modern intelligence agencies still use this principle, proving some tricks are truly timeless. The ultimate irony, many medieval ciphers were broken not by rival spies but by overzealous clerks. When the Duke of Burgundy's accountant corrected what he assumed were scribble errors in a financial report, he accidentally decrypted battle plans that had eluded English cryptanalysts for months. This taught rulers a harsh lesson. The strongest code means nothing if the human element fails. That delicate balance between complexity and usability, between making messages unbreakable yet still practical, is the same challenge that keeps cybersecurity experts up at night. The parchment and wax may have given way to pixels and encryption algorithms, but the game remains unchanged. Control the code and you control history. Now consider this while we marvel at today's quantum cryptography. Our medieval counterparts were achieving similar feats with lemon juice and candle smoke. Their greatest legacy isn't just the techniques they invented, but the mindset they forged. That information is only as secure as the cleverness of those who protect it. And as we'll see next, when that cleverness failed, the consequences could rewrite maps. The Crusades didn't just clash swords, they waged an invisible war of information, where victory often hinged on who could outrun rumor and deception. Picture a Templar knight disguised as a pilgrim, his rough woolen cloak concealing a hollowed-out cross packed with encrypted letters detailing troop movements from Cyprus to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, a Mamluk rider streaks across the Sinai desert, his satchel carrying battle orders that will decide the fate of cities. This was communication as bloodsport, where every message carried the weight of kingdoms. The Knights Templar built history's first multinational banking system on the backs of their couriers. These weren't just men in armor, they were financial operatives who could transport vast sums without moving a single coin. How? Through encrypted letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit funds in Paris and withdraw them in Acre, all verified by a cipher known only to trusted brothers. Their network of preceptories doubled as relay stations, where fresh horses and coded passphrases kept the lifeblood of Crusader financing flowing. When the King of France needed to pay mercenaries besieging Damascus, Templar messengers delivered the equivalent of millions in today's currency through a single strip of parchment marked with seemingly random dots, a code so secure that intercepted letters baffled Muslim cryptographers for decades. Saladin's forces countered with their own lethal efficiency, while European armies relied on slow-moving heralds in bright tabards. The Ayyubids employed Bedouin scouts who could cross 60 miles of desert overnight. Their masterstroke, pigeon posts linking Cairo to Damascus, birds carrying tiny silk scrolls that outpaced any cavalry. During the siege of Jerusalem in 1187, these winged couriers allowed Saladin to coordinate simultaneous attacks on Crusader strongholds across 3 countries. A feat of synchronization unimaginable to his fragmented enemies. The real genius lay in their authentication system. Each scroll bore a unique wax seal pressed with the Sultan's ring, but the true verification came from the pigeon itself. Only birds raised in specific rooftop coops would be accepted, making interception nearly impossible. Acre's fall exposed the fatal fragility of Crusader communications. As Mamluk siege engines pounded the city's walls in 1291, desperate pleas for reinforcements piled up in Cypriot harbors undelivered because Geno's shipmasters refused to sail without upfront payment. Contrast this with the Mamluks' drum communication system, where rhythmic beats from hilltop stations could relay simple codes across 30 miles in minutes. When the final assault came, it was signaled by a thunderous drumroll echoing from Haifa to Beirut, mobilizing reserves before Crusader sentries even understood the threat. What made these systems so transformative was their adaptability. Templar couriers evaded capture by posing as lepers, their bandaged hands hiding maps drawn on the wrappings. Muslim messengers used Quranic calligraphy to mask military dispatches, knowing Christian interceptors wouldn't risk destroying holy text. Both sides grasped a fundamental truth. In holy war, controlling the narrative was as vital as controlling territory. A well-timed rumor of betrayal could dissolve alliances faster than any battlefield defeat. The legacy of these networks still echoes in modern asymmetrical warfare. The Taliban's use of motorcycle couriers to evade drone surveillance mirrors Templar riders exploiting pilgrim routes. Israel's Iron Dome alerts share DNA with Saladin's beacon chains that lit the night from Alexandria to Aleppo. These medieval communicators understood what every general since has learned. Victory doesn't always go to the strongest army, but to the best informed one. Now, as we turn eastward, prepare to encounter a system that made even the Templars' network seem provincial, the Barid of the Islamic world, where riders didn't just carry messages, but acted as the eyes and ears of caliphs across 3 continents. The Barid wasn't just a postal service. It was the nervous system of an empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Indus. Imagine a chain of way stations spaced precisely 20 miles apart, each one a hive of activity where fresh mounts stood ready and scribes meticulously logged arrivals. A message from Damascus could reach Cordoba in under 2 weeks, a speed unthinkable in fragmented Europe. But what truly set this system apart wasn't just its reach, it was how the Umayyads weaponized bureaucracy. Every courier carried a detailed travel log noting departure times, rest stops, even the condition of roads. This wasn't about efficiency, it was about control. The caliphs understood something revolutionary. Information delayed was power denied. Camels were the unsung heroes of this network. While European messengers struggled with muddy paths and lame horses, Barid riders exploited the dromedary's ability to cover 100 miles without water. Stations along desert routes kept special breeds lean, long-legged beasts bred for endurance rather than speed. But the real innovation came from the Abbasids, who turned these humble caravans into intelligence-gathering machines. Couriers doubled as spies, noting rebel activity, crop yields, even local gossip in their official reports. A seemingly mundane detail about delayed tax payments in Egypt might signal brewing dissent, triggering preemptive strikes before revolts could coalesce. The Barid's paper trail was its masterpiece. Surviving fragments of their Diwan records reveal an almost modern obsession with data. Routes were adjusted based on seasonal sandstorms, messenger pay was docked for delays exceeding 3 hours, and urgent dispatches were marked with colored silk ribbons corresponding to priority levels. One account describes a governor being fined 6 months' salary because his urgent plea for reinforcements arrived with a faded green ribbon, proving he'd delayed sending it. This merciless accountability created a culture where procrastination could be fatal. Espionage flowed both ways. The Barid's very reliability made it a target for infiltration. Byzantine agents learned to bribe station masters to lose certain messages, while rebel groups perfected the art of forging the caliph's distinctive rhomboid wax seals. The system's greatest vulnerability, its own success. As the Abbasid bureaucracy grew bloated, messages sometimes vanished into administrative limbo, like the infamous case where a Baghdad judge's ruling against a powerful vizier took 3 months to travel 5 miles from the courthouse to the palace. Yet the Barid's legacy outlasted the caliphates themselves. Its relay station model inspired the Mongol Yam. Its record-keeping foreshadowed modern logistics tracking, and its fusion of communication with governance became the blueprint for every efficient empire that followed. Even the ribbon priority system echoes today in emails, urgent flags. But perhaps its most enduring lesson was psychological. By making information move at predictable speeds, the Barid didn't just connect cities. It created the illusion of a shrinking world where power could stretch its fingers anywhere, anytime, and that idea, more than camels or clay tablets, was what truly changed history. Now let's turn to a very different kind of revolution, because when the Renaissance's thinkers needed to share their world-shaking ideas, they didn't rely on imperial couriers. They built something far more unpredictable, a network of scholars, merchants, and rogue printers who turned information into a force no king could fully control. The Renaissance reshaped the world not with brushstrokes alone, but through an explosion of whispered conversations carried by men in dusty boots. When Erasmus penned his scandalous critiques of the Church, those words didn't magically leap from Rotterdam to Rome. They traveled in the saddlebags of couriers who knew every backroad tavern where they could swap horses without attracting notice. These weren't just deliverymen, they were the original social media algorithms, deciding which scholars' letters got priority based on the jingle of coins in their purses. A single packet might contain a groundbreaking mathematical proof, a bawdy satire mocking cardinals, and a merchant's encrypted ledger, all riding together down the same muddy roads that had carried crusaders centuries before. The Medici family's rise to power reads like a masterclass in information warfare. While their rivals relied on slow-moving church envoys, the Florentine bankers operated a shadow network of merchant couriers. A wool shipment bound for Bruges might conceal loan agreements with the Duke of Burgundy, while a crate of Venetian glass carried cipher keys to unlock account books in Lyon. Their real stroke of genius, turning every branch of their banking empire into a relay station. A Medici agent in London could send a coded message to Naples faster than the English king could dispatch his own heralds, because their couriers bypassed customs checks with bribes sealed in wax medallions bearing the family crest. Paradoxically, the printing press, often credited with making scribes obsolete, turned couriers into the most sought-after professionals in Europe. Printers in Mainz might produce hundreds of copies of a radical treatise, but getting those books past territorial borders required smuggling expertise worthy of a spy novel. Some couriers hollowed out wine barrels to hide contraband texts, while others bribed river inspectors to lose crates marked as liturgical supplies. The most daring disguised forbidden books as devotional primers, knowing guards wouldn't risk desecrating what appeared to be scripture. When the church banned the Talmud in 1553, Jewish booksellers developed an entire underground railroad of couriers who could transport entire libraries across the Alps in false-bottomed grain wagons. What made this era unique was the couriers' evolving role as cultural curators. A Habsburg envoy carrying Luther's 95 Theses to Rome might secretly share copies with German nobles along the route, accelerating the Protestant Reformation through strategic leaks. Venetian messengers hired by competing trading houses inadvertently became knowledge brokers, as dockworkers bribed them for fragments of overseas news that could predict commodity prices. Even the humble post rider delivering love letters between noble estates often carried hidden compartments with political gossip that could make or break marriages and alliances. The true measure of their impact lies in the accidents of survival. When a courier drowned crossing the Loire in 1522, the waterlogged letters in his bag preserved a snapshot of Renaissance Europe's intellectual ferment. Pleas for patronage from alchemists, sketches from Da Vinci's disciples, even a recipe for ink that could resist censorship fires. Centuries later, historians realized these lost dispatches contained more raw insight than most official chronicles, because while kings wrote for posterity, couriers carried the unvarnished truth, the arguments, the jokes, the panicked revisions that showed ideas evolving in real time. Among these anonymous figures, a few became legends. Men like Pietro della Stufa, the Medici courier who memorized a 2-hour speech to the French king when robbers stole his documents, or the mysterious Grey Sister, who transported forbidden feminist tracts disguised as medical texts. Their stories remind us that every great intellectual revolution depended not just on brilliant minds, but on the daring souls who braved storms, bandits, and burning pyres to ensure those ideas wouldn't die at the city gates. And as we'll see next, some of these couriers didn't just deliver history, they made it. Fadipides didn't just run, he collapsed. The legendary Greek courier who sprinted 150 miles from Athens to Sparta and back, then another 26 to deliver news of victory at Marathon, didn't live to see his feat immortalized. His final gasp, "Rejoice, we conquer," etched his name into history, but we often forget he was just one link in a chain of unsung runners who kept Greek city-states connected. These men weren't athletes, they were human telegraphs, trained from youth to memorize speeches verbatim while covering mountainous terrain in leather sandals. When Persian ships threatened Athens, it was these anonymous couriers, not generals, who allowed the Greeks to outmaneuver an empire. Elena of Aquitaine's messengers operated with more finesse but equal daring. While her royal husband, Henry II, relied on slow-moving heralds, Elena's couriers moved like shadows through back corridors of power. Her most trusted envoy, a literate nun named Alay, carried encrypted letters between England and Aquitaine disguised as religious missives. These weren't just love notes, they contained coded instructions for rebellion when Elena plotted against Henry. One parchment, later found sewn into a saddle, revealed a chess-like strategy for turning the king's sons against him. The courier's genius, she'd inked the treasonous portions in a solution that vanished unless held over candlelight, leaving only pious platitudes visible to interceptors. Then there's Ibn Fadlan, the Abbasid scholar turned accidental chronicler. Sent north in 921 as a diplomatic courier to the Volga Vikings, his journey became one of history's most extraordinary eyewitness accounts. His dispatches back to Baghdad, filled with vivid details of Viking funeral pyres, shark meat banquets, and eerie encounters with Norse traders, nearly got him killed when local chieftains realized he was documenting their customs. What saved him? The very invisibility of his role. To the Vikings, he was just another scribe shuffling parchments, not a threat worth noticing. His reports, nearly lost to time, now offer our clearest window into a world that left few written records. These figures shared one trait. They understood that carrying messages wasn't just about speed, it was about strategy. Fadipides knew when to switch from mountain paths to coastline roads to avoid Persian scouts. Elena's couriers timed their rides to coincide with monastery guest nights, blending into crowds of pilgrims. Ibn Fadlan mastered the art of appearing harmless while mentally recording every detail for later transcription. Their successes weren't accidents, they were calculated triumphs over geography, politics, and human nature. Yet for every courier who became legendary, thousands vanished into the footnotes. The nameless Mongol rider who carried news of Genghis Khan's death across 6,000 miles in winter, the Venetian spy whose forged letters ignited the Cyprus War, the Byzantine nun who smuggled siege plans in her hymnal during the Arab blockade of Constantinople. What united them all was a willingness to bet their lives on a simple premise, that words delivered at the right moment to the right ears could alter destiny. Their legacy lingers in surprising places. Modern marathon runners retrace Fadipides' fatal sprint. Diplomatic pouches still bear seals not so different from Elena's wax emblems. And intelligence agencies train operatives in observation techniques Ibn Fadlan would recognize instantly. But perhaps the most fitting tribute lies in something far simpler. Every time we hit send on an email or watch a news alert flash across our screens, we're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself. The mediums change, but the mission remains. Make the message move, whatever the cost. Now brace yourself, because for every courier who changed history, countless others met brutal ends. The roads they traveled weren't just routes of connection, they were gauntlets of unimaginable danger. The road was a courier's battlefield, not with clashing swords, but with silent, creeping dangers. Bandits knew these riders carried more than parchment. They bore secrets worth fortunes. A single intercepted letter could reveal troop movements, betrayal plots, even the location of royal treasuries. Ambush spots like England's Sherwood Forest or the Alpine Brenner Pass became infamous graveyards for couriers. Some attackers weren't after information at all, just the horse, the clothes, or the silver seal rings that could be melted down. Surviving accounts describe messengers found with their tongues cut out, not to silence them, but to steal the gold fillings noble employers sometimes used to ensure loyalty. Interrogation was an art form in the shadows. Captured couriers faced methods designed to break the mind before the body. Venetian agents used the water cure, forcing prisoners to drink until their stomachs swelled, then jumping on them to extract answers. The Mongols preferred psychological torture. A messenger might watch his fingers being fed to dogs one by one, while interrogators calmly promised his family would be next. Yet some couriers turned the tables. A Burgundian rider, when caught by English spies, recited a flawless decoy message under torture, knowing his real dispatch was tattooed in reverse on his scalp, hidden under grown-out hair. Nature itself conspired against them. Winter crossings of the Pyrenees claimed countless lives, with frozen corpses still clutching their satchels discovered centuries later in melting glaciers. Summer brought plagues. Couriers racing ahead of outbreaks often carried the sickness themselves, unwittingly becoming vectors. Rivers were particularly treacherous. The Loire's unpredictable floods swallowed entire way stations, while the Danube's currents swept away riders attempting moonlight crossings. One Habsburg courier's journal describes clinging to his horse for 18 hours during a snowstorm, only to lose both the animal and his toes to frostbite before reaching safety. The psychological toll was just as brutal. Many couriers developed road madness, a condition scribes attributed to prolonged isolation and constant vigilance. Symptoms included talking to imaginary companions, forgetting their own names, or attacking strangers who approached too suddenly. Some monastic hospitals kept special cells for these broken men, their walls scratched with endless repetitions of routes and passwords. Others turned to alcohol or opium to numb the strain, becoming liabilities their employers quietly disposed of. Yet for all these horrors, what's most striking is how many couriers willingly embraced the danger. Some were fugitives seeking redemption through service outlaw knights given one last chance to prove their honor. Others were second sons with no inheritance, trading their lives for a shot at land grants or titles. But many were simply desperate. A peasant might volunteer for courier duty to pay off crushing debts, knowing the job offered higher wages and higher mortality than farming. Their loyalty often hinged on clever incentives. The Ming dynasty's nail system rewarded couriers who drove bronze spikes into way station walls as proof of timely arrivals. Collect enough, and your family's taxes were forgiven. Women faced even greater risks, yet thrived in these networks precisely because no one suspected them. A nun's habit could hide battle plans stitched into a scapula, while a merchant's wife might conceal encrypted letters in her cosmetics jars. Their stories, long overshadowed, reveal a hidden world where the most vulnerable messengers often proved the most ingenious. Because when the fate of empires hung in the balance, courage came in many disguises. History often paints the medieval courier as a bearded rider in chainmail, but the truth is far more intriguing. Behind the scenes, women wove themselves into the very fabric of these networks, exploiting societal blind spots to become some of history's most effective messengers. Take Margaret of Anjou, the formidable queen who turned courtly traditions into a weapon during the Wars of the Roses. While her enemies monitored roads and bridges, she simply tucked dispatches into the embroidery frames carried by her ladies-in-waiting documents that would later coordinate Lancastrian uprisings from Scotland to Cornwall. These noblewomen moved through checkpoints unchallenged, their elaborate gowns hiding more secrets than any courier's saddlebag. Convents became unexpected hubs of clandestine communication. The Abbey of Barking near London operated as a veritable clearinghouse for intelligence during the 100 Years' War, with nuns transcribing coded messages into illuminated manuscripts. Sister Marjorie Kemp, a brewer turned mystic, famously carried letters between English wool merchants and Flemish weavers by hiding them in barrels of ale, a trick she learned watching her father's trade. Church immunity gave these women unique protection. Even the most aggressive warlords hesitated to violate a nun's habit. Some monastic orders developed entire ciphers based on liturgical calendars, where feast days corresponded to troop movements and psalm numbers indicated meeting points. Then there were the women who operated in plain sight precisely because no one took them seriously. Midwives crisscrossed battle lines with birthing supplies concealing political treatises. Laundresses smuggled letters in bundles of nobles' soiled linens, knowing no guard would pour through royal undergarments. The most audacious might have been the anonymous fishwife of Calais, who for years ferried intelligence between England and France by sewing dispatches into the gills of her daily catch. Her cover was perfect. Who would suspect a smelly old woman haggling over cod prices? The New World introduced even more daring operatives, La Malinche, the Nahua woman who served as Cortés' interpreter, didn't just translate words, she controlled their flow. By selectively editing messages between Spanish conquistadors and Aztec rulers, she effectively redirected entire campaigns. Her knowledge of both Mayan and Nahuatl dialects made her irreplaceable, though history remembers her as either a traitor or victim rather than the strategic courier she truly was. Similarly, African slave markets in Lisbon became unlikely intelligence hubs, where enslaved women like Isabel de Olvera carried coded market gossip between Portuguese and Castilian factions, using their invisibility as property to mask high-stakes diplomacy. What makes these women's contributions so extraordinary isn't just their bravery, but their ingenuity in weaponizing stereotypes. While male couriers relied on speed and strength, women exploited societal assumptions about their harmlessness. A pregnant woman could cross enemy lines unchallenged. One Burgundian countess famously delayed her confinement by padding her gowns, buying crucial weeks to shuttle messages between rebel factions. Older women leveraged their reputation as gossips to accidentally reveal false troop movements within earshot of spies. Even the humble peddler woman became a master of misdirection, her basket of ribbons concealing more than needles and thread. The darkest testament to their effectiveness lies in the punishments they risked. While male couriers faced execution, women interceptors often suffered gendered violence. The scold's bridle, iron muzzle wasn't just for nagging wives, but for couriers whose tongues needed silencing. Joan of Arc's alleged crimes included not just heresy, but acting as a messenger for divine voices that threatened earthly powers. Yet still they persisted, carving out spaces of influence where none were supposed to exist. As plague carts began rolling through city gates and old certainties crumbled, these networks would face their greatest test yet, because when death stalked the land, the rules of the game changed forever, and so too did the shadows in which couriers moved. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it severed the lifelines of empires. As plague swept through Europe in 1347, the familiar sight of couriers galloping between cities vanished. Roads once bustling with merchants and messengers became ghostly corridors, littered with abandoned carts and the occasional corpse. Yet even in this apocalypse, information had to move. The difference now, every parchment carried was a potential death sentence. Some couriers resorted to macabre improvisation. In Milan, riders wore waxed leather cloaks and beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, not just to ward off miasmas, but to signal their immunity to terrified villagers. Venetian messengers developed a chilling protocol. Letters were sealed with wax, then submerged in vinegar barrels for 3 days before delivery. The logic was sound. Vinegar's acidity might kill plague remnants, but the reality was grimmer. Many dispatches arrived stained and illegible, their urgency lost to makeshift sterilization. The church's networks faced a unique dilemma. Pilgrimage routes, once perfect cover for covert messaging, now funneled death from town to town. A single infected friar carrying a cardinal's letter could doom an entire monastery. The solution: dead drops at crossroads shrines, where couriers left scrolls in hollowed-out statues to be collected by gloved hands days later. This delayed relay system slowed communication to a crawl but kept some threads of Christendom connected. Opportunists thrived in the chaos. The Duke of Austria's spies spread rumors via courier that neighboring towns were deliberately poisoning wells, sparking pogroms that diverted blame from his own failing policies. In Florence, the Bardi banking family collapsed not just from plague deaths, but because their couriers were systematically ambushed by rivals seizing debt records. The most brazen power grab came from French physician Guy de Chauliac, who used his position as papal courier to hoard plague remedies, selling them only to nobles who supported his patron's political ambitions. Yet amid the horror emerged unexpected innovations. Jewish communities in the Rhineland, long experienced in evading persecution, developed the first sterile routing. Messengers traveled only between unaffected households, avoiding main roads entirely. Their system proved so effective that surviving records show their death tolls were often half those of neighboring Christian towns. Over in Muslim Spain, the Nasrid sultans repurposed irrigation tunnels as underground postal routes, keeping Granada's government functioning while surface streets filled with bodies. The plague's ultimate lesson was one of brutal pragmatism. As death reshaped the continent, the old rules of communication no longer applied. A courier's worth was measured not by his speed or eloquence, but by his willingness to enter plague-stricken cities others fled. The survivors of this grim culling would go on to form the backbone of Renaissance Europe's revived networks, hardened, adaptable, and forever changed by the understanding that information wasn't just power. In times of crisis, it was survival itself. Now consider the tools that made such feats possible, not just the horses and satchels we imagine, but ingenious devices straight out of a spy's wildest dreams. A courier's survival often hinged on the tools hidden in plain sight. Take the humble pilgrim's staff, outwardly a simple walking stick, but twist the handle just so, and it would split open to reveal a compartment for rolled dispatches. These hollowed-out canes became so common that border guards in medieval France were known to snap suspicious staffs over their knees, prompting couriers to craft decoy compartments while stashing the real messages in wax-sealed hollows beneath their boots. Saddles, too, became masterpieces of deception. Wealthy merchants might ride atop what appeared to be ordinary leather seats, unaware the padding concealed layers of oiled parchment carrying diplomatic treaties, each layer separated by scented herbs to throw off scent-tracking hounds. Wax tablets were the original burn-after-reading technology. Unlike parchment that could survive centuries, these reusable surfaces let couriers jot down verbal instructions, then melt the wax with a candle's flame once memorized. The Byzantines took this further with mirror tablets, messages etched into wax so thinly that sunlight shining through the back would project the words onto walls, allowing recipients to read them without ever touching the incriminating surface. For more permanent encryption, cipher wheels carved from boxwood became the pocket calculators of medieval espionage. Rotating concentric rings engraved with letters allowed couriers to encode and decode messages at way stations, their compact size letting them pass as devotional prayer wheels if inspected. Speed was meaningless without stamina, which is why the smartest couriers invested in bloodlines rather than gadgets. Arabian horses, bred for desert endurance, could cover 60 miles in a day without breaking stride, while Andalusians navigated mountain switchbacks with sure-footed grace. But the real secret wasn't just the breed, it was the care. Mongol riders massaged their horses' legs with fermented mare's milk to prevent swelling, while Venetian couriers fed their steeds salt-soaked oats to increase water retention for long sea voyages. A well-trained horse could recognize danger before its rider, stopping dead at the scent of ambush or finding lost paths in blizzards. Navigation tools transformed couriers into human compasses. Star charts etched onto ivory discs helped riders maintain course during cloudy nights, while pocket sundials calibrated for different latitudes ensured timely arrivals. The most ingenious might have been wind roses, miniature weather vanes worn as cloak pins that doubled as route markers. By memorizing prevailing winds along their routes, couriers could navigate fog-shrouded coasts where landmarks vanished. Alpine messengers even carried snow lenses, concave pieces of tinted glass that filtered glare to reveal hidden crevices or the subtle depressions of old paths under fresh powder. What united these tools wasn't just their cleverness, but their adaptability. A cipher wheel could become a child's toy if tossed into a market stall. A weather-vane pin might be mistaken for pilgrim's trinket. Even the horses played their part, trained to respond to knee pressure rather than vocal commands, ensuring silent movement through hostile territory. This arsenal of everyday objects reveals a deeper truth. The most effective weapons in the information war weren't swords or siege engines, but the quiet genius of things nobody thought to notice. Yet no tool was more powerful than the courier's ability to blend sacred and secret. When monasteries began offering sanctuary to travelers, they unwittingly created the perfect cover for covert networks, a development that would turn religion into the ultimate disguise. Monasteries didn't just preserve knowledge, they weaponized it through divine logistics. Picture a Benedictine monk trudging through a snowbound alpine pass, his rough woolen habit concealing a satchel of priceless manuscripts and a sealed letter that could alter the balance of European power. These cloistered scholars became the backbone of a communications network so reliable that kings and popes entrusted them with their most sensitive secrets. The Benedictine rule, with its emphasis on stability and obedience, created the perfect framework for a continent-spanning relay system. Each abbey functioned like a server node in a vast medieval internet, where information was copied, encrypted, and transmitted with monastic precision. The real stroke of genius was their neutrality. Unlike secular couriers who might be swayed by politics or gold, monks answered to a higher authority, literally. When the Holy Roman Emperor needed to communicate with his rebellious Italian cities, he sent his demands via Cistercian messengers, knowing their black and white robes granted safe passage through war zones. Papal bulls condemning heretics traveled faster through monastic channels than royal post, because attacking a messenger of God carried eternal consequences. Even excommunicated rulers hesitated to intercept abbey-bound dispatches, fearing divine retribution more than any earthly army. Scriptoriums doubled as cryptographic labs. Scribes didn't just copy texts, they perfected techniques to safeguard them. Some manuscripts contained palimpsests, where sensitive letters were scraped away and overwritten with harmless sermons, retrievable only by holding the vellum to candlelight at a precise angle. Others used holy steganography, embedding secret messages in the decorative flourishes of illuminated Bibles. A particularly cunning abbot in Cluny developed a cipher based on Gregorian chants, where the placement of neum notations above certain syllables spelled out warnings about impending invasions. Their courier training was rigorous. Novices memorized entire books of scripture not just for piety, but to develop the mental discipline needed for verbatim message retention. Some orders maintained silent runners, monks who took vows of perpetual silence to prevent accidental disclosures if captured. The most trusted were multilingual polyglots, fluent in everything from ecclesiastical Latin to Moorish trade dialects, allowing them to blend into any region. A single well-placed Benedictine could deliver a Frankish king's ultimatum to a Saxon warlord, then carry back the reply coded as a psalm verse, the system's crowning achievement. The Literae Clausi, papal letters sealed with a unique wax imprint that, if broken improperly, revealed tampering. Only abbots possessed the secret technique to open them without damage, usually involving heated knives and prayers recited in reverse. When King Philip IV of France tried to intercept one such letter during his feud with Pope Boniface VIII, the wax crumbled into dust, exposing his treachery to all of Christendom. This sacred postal service didn't just connect abbeys, it fueled intellectual revolutions. Arabic medical texts smuggled out of Moorish Spain by Dominican friars sparked Renaissance anatomy studies. Norse sagas preserved by Icelandic monks resurfaced centuries later to reshape Viking historiography. Even Marco Polo's travels might have been forgotten had a Genos war prisoner not dictated his story to a scribe in a Pisan monastery. The monks' greatest gift wasn't their ink or parchment, but their patience. They played the long game, preserving ideas until the world was ready to receive them. As the age of exploration dawned, these networks would face their greatest test yet, because when Columbus set sail for the New World, his ships carried more than sailors and supplies. They bore the seeds of a global communication revolution, where monastic scrolls would give way to ship logs and abbey cloisters would be replaced by bustling port cities. The divine postal service had kept Europe connected through its darkest centuries, but now the whole world was about to become the message. Crossing an ocean didn't just stretch geography, it shattered the very concept of distance. When Columbus returned from his first voyage, his reports took months to reach the Spanish court, carried by ships that could vanish in a storm or fall prey to pirates. The solution: a ruthless new breed of couriers who treated the Atlantic like a highway. The Spanish crown established a relay system of avisos, light, fast ships that raced between Seville and the Caribbean, each one carrying dispatches marked with colored flags indicating urgency. A red pennant meant rebellion in Mexico, black signaled a treasure fleet in danger. These couriers didn't just sail, they survived hurricanes, outran privateers, and sometimes resorted to tossing cargo overboard to gain speed. One captain's log from 1542 describes jettisoning 3 chests of silver to save a single pouch containing news of a French attack on Havana. Gold could be replaced, timely intelligence could not. The real challenge wasn't just crossing the ocean, it was conquering the continents beyond. In the Andes, Spanish conquistadors gaped at the Inca chasqui system, where relay runners could cover 250 miles in a day along stone-paved roads. These indigenous couriers, trained from childhood, carried quippers, knotted cords encoding everything from tax records to military orders, while chewing coca leaves to suppress fatigue. Their stamina was legendary. One account describes a chasqui sprinting from Cusco to Quito, over 800 miles in under a week to deliver news of Pizarro's arrival. The Spanish quickly co-opted this network, but with a sinister twist. They used the same roads to spread smallpox warnings ahead of their advance, turning the Inca's own communication web into a vector of biological warfare. Meanwhile, Portugal's Correio Maritimo turned tiny islands into lifelines. Ships bound for Brazil would drop sealed barrels at the Azores, where fresh crews would retrieve them and race onward to Lisbon. The system was so efficient that King João III once received a letter from Bahia faster than his own governor in Rio. But the true innovation came from necessity. When Dutch privateers began intercepting ships, Portuguese couriers switched to letter bombs, hollow cannonballs filled with dispatches that could be fired onto friendly beaches if capture seemed imminent. Back in Europe, these oceanic couriers became the original celebrity adventurers. Men like Pedro de Mendoza, who survived shipwrecks and mutinies to deliver the first maps of the Rio de la Plata, were feted in taverns and royal courts alike. Their tales, often exaggerated, fed the public's hunger for New World wonders. A single courier's account of El Dorado could spark a gold rush. A whispered rumor of Amazon warrior queens might divert entire expeditions. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was myth-making on a continental scale. Yet for all their ingenuity, these systems had a fatal flaw. They depended on fragile wooden vessels vulnerable to nature's whims. The infamous 1588 Spanish Armada disaster wasn't just a military defeat, it was a communications blackout. With the fleet destroyed, Philip II's orders to his American viceroys languished for years, leaving colonies to fend for themselves. The lesson was clear. Empires built on ocean-spanning courier networks were only as strong as their weakest ship. As the Reformation ignited religious wars across Europe, these hard-won maritime routes would soon carry a new kind of cargo, not gold or coordinates, but ideas explosive enough to rewrite the map of Christendom itself. And the men who carried them wouldn't need fast ships or strong legs. They'd need printing presses and the audacity to think a single pamphlet could topple a pope. The Reformation didn't just challenge the church, it hacked the medieval information highway, turning couriers into revolutionaries with ink-stained hands. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to that Wittenberg church door in 1517, the real explosion happened not in the wood, but in the speed with which those words raced across Europe. Within a month, handwritten copies reached Rome, Paris, and London, not by accident but through a clandestine network of students, merchants, and disgruntled priests who risked heresy charges to spread Luther's ideas. These weren't just messengers, they were true believers smuggling pamphlets in wine barrels, stitching condensed versions into the linings of pilgrim cloaks, even carving key phrases into cheese wheels that would be read aloud in market squares. The church had never faced a crisis like this, not because the ideas were new, but because they moved faster than the censors could react. Catholic counter-reformers struck back with equal ingenuity. Jesuit couriers trained in cryptography and disguise began intercepting Protestant dispatches at river crossings and alpine passes, their weapon of choice. The palimpsest pigeon carrier birds released with forged messages attached, designed to sow confusion among reformist networks. One intercepted letter from Geneva to Strasbourg was cleverly altered to suggest Lutheran leaders were secretly embezzling donation funds, sparking infighting that stalled the movement for months. The Vatican even established a shadowy office called the Black Chamber, where specialists steamed open letters, copied their contents, then resealed them with forged wax insignias so perfect even dukes couldn't spot the tampering. The battleground wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Protestant printers in Basel developed trap pamphlets, books with incendiary titles like The Pope's Secret Mistresses, that, when opened, revealed blank pages save for a single line: "If you seek lies, look to Rome." Catholic couriers retaliated by salt-smuggling routes, packing gunpowder into hollowed-out Bibles destined for reformist safehouses. The explosion that leveled half a Leipzig print shop in 1529 wasn't an accident. It was Europe's first recorded act of ideological sabotage via postal terrorism. This frenzy of communication birthed unexpected innovations. The first newsletters emerged not from publishers, but from courier networks compiling eyewitness accounts of Reformation battles and distributing them to subscribers, a primitive Associated Press for the 16th century. Merchant guilds, tired of their trade routes being disrupted by religious wars, created neutral passport seals, guaranteeing couriers safe passage regardless of faith. Even children got involved, with orphanages in Strasbourg training boys as singing couriers who memorized messages set to folk tunes, making them impossible to intercept without violence that would turn public sympathy against the attackers. The true legacy of this information war wasn't just who won, but how it changed the rules forever. For the first time, ideas could outrun armies, and public opinion became a force as decisive as any cannon. When the dust settled, Europe found itself in a new era, one where power belonged not just to those who controlled territory, but to those who controlled narratives. And as courier networks slowly gave way to printing presses and postal services, their techniques didn't vanish. They simply slipped into the shadows, waiting to resurface in the hands of a different kind of operator, the modern spy. The golden age of shadowy riders and coded dispatches didn't vanish overnight. It bled away slowly, like ink dissolving in rain. By the mid-1600s, Europe's fractured kingdoms began consolidating their chaotic messenger networks into something resembling modern postal services. But here's what most history books miss. Those first national mail systems weren't replacements for medieval couriers, they were their bastard children. Take England's Royal Mail, established by Henry VIII in 1516. Its founding charter didn't just standardize postage rates, it quietly absorbed the remnants of monastic and mercantile courier networks, turning former spies and smugglers into crown employees with pensions. The uniforms were new, but the tricks straight from the medieval playbook. Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth I's spymaster, proved just how vital those old tactics remained. His Secret Service wasn't some bureaucratic novelty. It was a direct evolution of the Templars' financial couriers and the Mongols' Yam riders. Agents still used hollowed-out staffs for sensitive documents, just as Burgundian messengers had done a century earlier. The cipher wheels that encrypted letters between English ambassadors, nearly identical to those used by Venetian bankers during the Renaissance. Even Walsingham's infamous letter trap, a fake dispatch planted to expose plotters, was a trick straight from Byzantine playbooks. The tools had polished edges now, but their DNA was unmistakably medieval. What truly survived was the mindset. Modern intelligence agencies didn't invent dead drops or steganography, they inherited them. When Cold War spies hid microfilm in walnuts or used flowerpot placements as signals, they were recycling techniques medieval couriers perfected, like the herb code, where certain plants in a monastery garden indicated safe houses. Even today's cybersecurity concepts owe debts to these ancient networks. Two-factor authentication. That's just a digital version of the Mongol pager, requiring both a tablet and a memorized passphrase. Encryption algorithms, they're the great-grandchildren of those lemon juice letters that vanished when heated. Yet something irreplaceable was lost in this transition. National postal systems prized reliability over ingenuity, bureaucracy over daring. The last true medieval couriers didn't die. They were pensioned off or jailed as highwaymen. The romance of the lone rider galloping through hostile territory gave way to stagecoaches on scheduled routes, but every now and then, history winks at us. During the Napoleonic Wars, Wellington's best dispatches still traveled via smuggler networks in Portugal. In World War II, the French resistance used Breton fishermen as couriers, men who navigated by the same coastal caves their ancestors had used to run contraband past royal tax ships. The lesson here isn't just about technology evolving. It's about how power always seeks to control the flow of information, whether through royal decrees or firewalls. Those medieval couriers understood something we're still grappling with today. Whoever controls the message controls the story. And stories, as any king or hacker will tell you, are what ultimately shape empires. Now, before we close this chapter, let's untangle fact from fiction, because few professions have been as mythologized or misunderstood as these shadow riders of history. Hollywood loves the image of a solitary courier racing through moonlit forests, dodging arrows to deliver a world-changing message. But the truth was far less dramatic and far more fascinating. These weren't reckless lone wolves, they were cogs in meticulously coordinated machines. Take the Mongol Yam system, where riders worked in rotating teams, passing messages like relay batons across thousands of miles. At each way station, fresh horses and a new courier stood ready, ensuring no single person bore the full physical toll. This wasn't just about speed, it was about sustainability. A rider might cover 60 miles before handing off to a teammate. His knowledge of the route's dangers, bandit hotspots, unstable river crossings, staying within the network like institutional memory. And those iconic wax seals, they were more exception than rule. High-stakes diplomatic letters might bear a monarch's insignia, but most everyday communication happened verbally to leave no paper trail. Byzantine merchants, for instance, trained their couriers to memorize complex trade agreements using rhythmic mnemonics, a practice borrowed from epic poets who could recite entire sagas. The real security wasn't in melted wax, but in dialects. A message about Venetian ship movements might be encoded in the regional slang of Murano glassblowers, incomprehensible to outsiders even if overheard. The biggest myth of all, that couriers were exclusively armored knights or noble emissaries. In reality, the profession thrived on invisibility. The Mamluks relied on enslaved Circassian youths as messengers precisely because no one suspected them. Jewish traders in medieval Spain used their diaspora connections to create cross-border networks that kings envied. Women played especially cunning roles, like the basket weavers of Burgundy, who carried rebel communiques beneath layers of dyed reeds, or the Byzantine nun whose choir robe hid pockets sewn with smuggled military dispatches. What made these systems so resilient was their adaptability. When the church banned written messages during the Albigensian Crusade, Cathar heretics developed a fabric-based cipher, specific stitches in peasant clothing spelling out safe-house locations. Muslim couriers in Granada exploited the rhythmic clatter of olive presses to mask tap-coded messages. Every attempt to suppress communication only bred more innovation, proving that information, like water, always finds a path. The echoes of their ingenuity surround us today. Modern GPS routing algorithms owe a conceptual debt to those Mongol way station maps, encrypted digital packets bouncing between servers. That's just the high-tech version of Venetian merchants splitting messages across multiple ships. Even the gig economy's delivery drivers unknowingly follow the footsteps of medieval peddlers who turned everyday travel into covert networks. The next time you tap your phone to send a message, remember, you're participating in a tradition far older and far richer than Hollywood could ever capture. From horseback to fiber optics, the medieval courier's legacy pulses through the veins of our digital age. Think of packets switching, the backbone of modern internet traffic, where data is broken into smaller chunks and routed dynamically across networks. This isn't so different from how Mongol riders split urgent messages into fragments, sending each by separate paths to confuse interceptors. Only when all pieces reached their destination would the full meaning emerge. Today's encrypted VPNs, they're the spiritual successors to Venetian merchants whispering ciphers into the ears of trusted scribes, ensuring only the intended recipient could reconstruct the message. The Silk Road's shadowy markets operated on something eerily familiar, a web of trust and verification. Traders used sealed tokens and familial dialects to authenticate deals, much like blockchain's cryptographic signatures today. When a medieval spice merchant in Samarkand accepted a promise of payment from a counterpart in Constantinople, he relied on a decentralized network of reputation, just as modern crypto transactions depend on distributed ledgers. Even the concept of escrow isn't new. Genos bankers held funds in neutral monasteries until couriers confirmed goods had arrived, a system mirrored in today's smart contracts. Dark web markets owe more to medieval spycraft than their users might realize. The dead drop, where information is hidden in prearranged locations, was perfected by Byzantine agents who left scrolls in hollow church statues. Modern hackers use digital dead drops, cloud storage links shared through encrypted channels, to exchange data without direct contact. And just as medieval couriers disguised themselves as pilgrims or lepers to evade detection, today's cyber operatives cloak their tracks behind layers of proxy servers and spoofed identities. Even our obsession with speed has ancient roots. The Mongol Yam system prioritized urgent messages with colored ribbons, a primitive version of today's high-priority email flags. When a 15th-century Florentine banker paid extra for expedited delivery, he was essentially using the medieval equivalent of overnight shipping. The race to reduce latency, whether in stock trades or streaming video, is just the latest chapter in humanity's relentless quest to shrink time and space. What's truly remarkable isn't how much has changed, but how little. The core challenges remain: securing data, verifying identity, and outmaneuvering adversaries. When a medieval courier memorized a message to leave no physical trace, he was practicing the same operational security as a modern whistleblower using burner phones. The tools have evolved, but the game is unchanged. Control the flow of information, and you control the narrative. And as we'll see in our final moments together, that narrative stretches far beyond technology, into the very fabric of power itself. The couriers who slipped through the shadows of history understood something profound. True influence often lies in staying unseen. Take the Magna Carta. Its words didn't spread because nobles shouted them from castle walls. They traveled via discreet messengers, often friars or wool merchants, who carried copies rolled inside hollowed-out prayer books. These unassuming couriers didn't just deliver parchment, they smuggled an idea that would reshape governance forever. Had they been caught, the documents would have burned, and with them, perhaps the seeds of modern democracy. The Renaissance offers an even starker example. When Cosimo de' Medici needed to transport newly rediscovered Greek manuscripts from Constantinople to Florence, he didn't trust them to galleys that pirates might board. Instead, his couriers disguised the texts as accounting ledgers, their true value hidden beneath columns of fabricated wool trades. One particularly daring agent sewed pages of Aristotle's lost works into the lining of his saddle, riding through bandit-infested passes with philosophy literally strapped to his body. Without these covert operations, the intellectual spark that ignited Europe's rebirth might have sputtered out before it caught flame. In the New World, the stakes were even higher. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés relied on indigenous couriers to maintain his fragile grip on Mexico, but their loyalty was tenuous. His solution: a brutal yet ingenious authentication system. Messengers carried notched sticks, each groove representing a day's journey, that only Cortés and his captains could decode. Tamper with the notches and the penalty was death. This crude but effective method allowed news of Aztec uprisings to reach him faster than his enemies could mobilize, proving that control wasn't just about swords, but about who controlled the narrative. The paradox of their anonymity is what makes couriers so fascinating. Unlike kings or generals, they built no monuments, yet their fingerprints are everywhere. Consider the Protestant Reformation. Luther's ideas spread so quickly because a shadow network of printers, apprentices, unofficial couriers in their own right, smuggled pamphlets across borders in barrels of ink and bales of paper. These nameless young men and women did more to fracture Christendom than any army could. Their power came precisely from being overlooked, from moving through the world like whispers in a crowded room. What does this mean for us today? In an age of digital surveillance and information overload, the medieval courier's tactics feel startlingly relevant. They mastered the art of moving vital knowledge while leaving minimal traces, a skill activists and journalists now emulate with encrypted apps and burner phones. Their understanding that routes matter as much as the message itself mirrors our modern obsession with VPNs and decentralized networks. Even their use of mundane objects as hiding places finds its echo in today's digital steganography, where sensitive data hides in plain sight within cat photos or music files. The deepest lesson, though, lies in their relationship with trust. Medieval couriers operated in a world where every hand might hold a knife, yet they built systems that, when functioning, could reliably span continents. They remind us that communication isn't just about technology. It's about human networks, about the unspoken agreements that allow societies to function. When those bonds fray, as they did during the Black Death or the wars of religion, even the most sophisticated systems collapse. So the next time you hit send on an email or watch a news alert flash across your screen, spare a thought for the riders, runners, and rogues who made such instant connection possible. Their legacy isn't just in the messages they carried, but in the radical idea that information wants to be free, and that those who control its flow quietly and relentlessly shape the world. Modern spycraft might seem light, years removed from medieval couriers galloping across muddy roads, but peel back the digital veneer, and you'll find the same timeless principles at work. Consider operational security, the art of leaving no trail. Today's intelligence officers practice compartmentalization, where agents know only what's necessary for their mission. That's not so different from Byzantine messengers who memorized only fragments of a treaty, ensuring no single capture could compromise the whole. Even the Mossad's famous burn after reading protocols echo the Venetian practice of writing dispatches on eggshell-thin parchment that crumbled at a touch. The tools have changed, but the mindset remains. Information is only as secure as its weakest link. Businesses grappling with data breaches could learn from the Mongols' redundancy systems. When a Yam rider's message was critical, 3 copies would travel separate routes, one by horseback, another by pigeon, a third hidden in a merchant's caravan. Modern IT departments call this data mirroring, backing up servers across multiple locations. The medieval twist, they factored in human psychology. By sending decoy riders with obvious codebooks, they siphoned interceptors away from the real payload, a tactic today's cybersecurity firms replicate with honeypot servers designed to attract hackers. For individuals, the courier's greatest lesson might be discretion. Those Renaissance bankers who encrypted loans as fabric dye recipes understood something we often forget. Not every thought needs a digital footprint. Their modern equivalents, journalists in hostile regions using disappearing messaging apps, or activists burying sensitive files in nested folders labeled as vacation photos. The gray man theory, blending in to avoid attention, was perfected by medieval couriers who mastered the art of being forgettable. That chatty friar at the tavern. He might be gauging political sentiment for his lord, just as social media analysts today parse public posts for trends. What's most striking is how these networks balanced speed with security. The Mamluks' pigeon posts were fast but vulnerable, so they paired them with slower, encrypted camel caravans. Sound familiar? It's the same logic behind sending sensitive documents via encrypted email while following up with a verification phone call. Even the concept of trust but verify has roots in the wax seals and cipher phrases medieval couriers used to authenticate messages, direct ancestors of today's two-factor authentication. Yet perhaps their most profound legacy is the realization that technology alone never guarantees safety. The couriers who thrived weren't those with the fastest horses or most complex codes, but those who understood human nature. They knew when to bribe a gatekeeper with gossip rather than gold, how to leverage family ties in distant cities, why a well-placed rumor could be more effective than 1,000 swords. In our era of AI and algorithms, that human factor remains the wild card, the reason phishing emails still fool us, and why the best firewalls can't stop a manipulated insider. As the digital age accelerates, these ancient strategies take on new urgency. The medieval courier's world, fractured, dangerous, alive with competing truths, looks less like a history lesson and more like a mirror. Their greatest gift wasn't just their tactics, but their proof that even in the darkest times, information finds a way, and that's a truth no firewall can contain. The legacy of medieval couriers lingers in every click, swipe, and notification lighting up our screens. These unsung operatives didn't just deliver letters, they engineered the very idea of connection across distances, proving that information isn't just power, it's the lifeblood of civilization. Imagine a world where news traveled at the speed of hoofbeats, where a single delayed message could mean the fall of a city or the collapse of an alliance. The stakes were life and death, and the couriers who navigated those risks were the original architects of our networked world. Think about how their innovations still shape us. The urgency of a breaking news alert, that's the descendant of Mongol riders galloping with war declarations, the encryption protecting your bank details. A direct heir to Venetian cipher wheels and lemon juice dispatches. Even modern logistics, the way packages zigzag across continents through hubs and spokes mirrors the relay stations of the Yam system. These weren't just messengers, they were proto-engineers building frameworks for communication so robust that their bones still support our digital age. But here's what's truly astonishing. Their greatest invention wasn't a tool or a route, it was trust. In a fractured world of shifting alliances, they convinced kings and peasants alike to rely on strangers carrying fragile scraps of truth. That leap of faith that a person you'd never met could faithfully bridge the gap between you and someone far away was revolutionary. Today, we take it for granted when an email zips across oceans in seconds. But that trust was hard-won over centuries of trial, betrayal, and ingenuity. Their stories also whisper a cautionary tale. The same networks that spread enlightenment also weaponized misinformation. A forged letter could spark a war, a withheld dispatch could doom an army. Sound familiar? In an era of deep fakes and algorithmic bubbles, the medieval courier's world feels uncomfortably close. They grappled with the dark side of connectivity long before hashtags and viral trends prove that every leap in communication brings both promise and peril. So the next time you send a text or refresh a feed, pause for a moment. Behind that simple act stretches an unbroken chain of riders, runners, and rebels who carved paths through wilderness and war to make such instant connection possible. Their names are lost, but their work endures in the invisible infrastructures we rely on, the delicate dance between secrecy and sharing, and the unshakable belief that words, no matter how far they travel, can still change everything. If these hidden architects of history captivated you, join us for more journeys into the shadows where the past shapes the present. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to ensure you never miss an untold story. Because history isn't just about the battles and crowns, it's about the whispers that moved between them and the ordinary people who carried those whispers into eternity. Ready to uncover more? The next delivery is already on its way.